You do see increasing discussion around what types of vehicles might be best used in attacks and what kind of higher vehicles might be better primed to kill more people than others. I'm Dr Shiraz Maher, a lecturer at King's College London and Deputy Director of the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation. The idea of the institution is to bring important issues relating to national security, radicalisation, terrorism and counterterrorism to the public's attention. My principal area of expertise is studying and looking at jihadist movements, in particular how they operate in Syria and Iraq, but also how they are using both of those arenas as a launch pad and a springboard to instigate attacks in the West and in Europe in particular. So what we've seen as Islamic State became more dominant and began to look at attack planning in the West and calling upon people to pull off attacks in the West was that you have had the first real vehicle-based attack here. So they wanted to move towards creating less sophisticated plots using ordinary, easier instruments to wage attacks in order to lower the barriers to participation. So when a vehicle was used for the first time, it was used in Nice on Bastille Day in relation to celebrations that the French were marking on that occasion, and a vehicle ploughed across and killed something like in excess of 80 people. Now, what that did was, in essence, it kind of established a proof of concept. It demonstrated that if you use a vehicle in a fairly confined place, you can mow down and kill a lot of people. It's worth bearing in mind that just using a truck in the way that this individual did in Nice, he killed more people than had been killed in London on the 7/7 attacks in 2005. So 4 bombs placed across this city, yet he had succeeded in killing more people. So for a group like ISIS that prioritizes mass carnage, that prioritizes disrupting our way of life in this kind of way, Nice really served as a watershed moment in terms of inspiring others and giving succor to others who would want to conduct that kind of attack for themselves. So Nice was a hugely significant moment because it had demonstrated to them just how potent a vehicle could be in an attack of the kind that we saw, and that clearly gave inspiration and succor to others who then went on to carry out copycat attacks, and we've seen that of course take place now in Scandinavia and Germany, and of course on 3 occasions on the streets of London. Certainly Al-Qaeda seems to me to have been the first group to try and proliferate this as a means, which then gets picked up by Islamic State and is in the first instance, at least in the Western context, used by them and by one of their supporters. But we've clearly also seen it used not by jihadists, so it's not an exclusive method just for jihadists. There was an attack, of course, in London outside the Finsbury Park Mosque where an individual drove a vehicle, a hire car, into a number of worshippers who were exiting the mosque there. But what I see in jihadist forums, the discussions I've seen over the last 6 months now, 7 months, where I've been working very intensively and looking at how ISIS is responding to the threat of loss of territory in Syria and Iraq, how it's trying to build itself into another phase, you do see increasing discussion around what types of vehicles might be best used in attacks and what kind of higher vehicles might be better primed to kill more people than others. So they're clearly going for vehicles that are heavier, vehicles that can be modified, vehicles that would not arouse too much suspicion if they were hired by a member of the public. So there is an awareness that there will be measures ultimately taken to try and counteract the use of vehicles, but there's also a discussion about, well, if you are going to use a vehicle, what's the best type in order to cause maximum carnage and destruction? There is an awareness and discussion of vehicles being used in different ways, and as I say, those who really understand this industry need to think about how to best raise the barriers to participation for those who are looking to clearly abuse the industry for malignant purposes. So one of the things we have seen is various industries, social media is a very good one, and the big tech giants come under intense scrutiny and pressure from governments in relation to extremist content hosted on their platforms and their sense of social responsibility, and they need to be proactive in guarding against that, mitigating its malignant effects and so on. Clearly, if you look at the approach taken towards counterterrorism across the United States, in Europe as a whole, in Britain, the notion is, of course, there is this hard-end policing, right? We have intelligence agencies, we have armed response units, we have a whole degree of hard-edged things, but at the base level, the idea is that this is pervasive. It's a social society movement that looks out for society as a whole. All industries, all sectors are being asked to look at whether they are prone to abuse, whether there is a way that terrorist actors are utilizing perfectly legitimate commercial services, or are utilizing some other kind of service or provision of goods or something in order to affect terrorist activity on the streets of either this country or elsewhere. So there is that sense of trying to get everyone to think pervasively in the course of their ordinary everyday activities what potential for abuse there is of their product or service, and then to mitigate against that, not just of course for the social good of everyone, but of course for their own corporate and financial interests as well. I think it's pretty clear to me that post-Nice there has been a shift and an establishment of using vehicles as a mechanism of terror. That, I think, has been very clearly demonstrated by Nice and has been popularized off the back of that particularly horrific attack. So the idea that we have seen the last of this, I think, is misguided. I think, unfortunately, we haven't seen the last of vehicle-based attacks either in the UK or elsewhere across the continent, or indeed in the United States.